Iceland's volcanoes awaken, so different and so unbloody. The two men were walking in the darkness of the night on the eastern outskirts of the small town of Vestmannaeyjar on the island of Heimaey, just over 10 kilometers from the southern coast of Iceland. After a day of violent storms, the wind had calmed down. The town was falling asleep. Suddenly, the two men saw huge sparks splashing in the air not far from their location, first from one point, then from several others, expanding in opposite directions. The initial suspicion, that of a house on fire, was quickly replaced by a dramatic certainty. A volcanic eruption was beginning, right there, just a stone's throw from the nearest houses of Vestmannaeyjar. It was 1:55 a.m. local time on Tuesday, January 23, 1973. In a short time, the eastern flank of the island, with its ancient volcanic cone called Helgafell, sacred mountain in Icelandic, was torn open by an eruptive fissure which, after a few hours, had reached a length of 3.5 kilometers, a typical buttonhole fissure with dozens of small eruptive vents aligned. The activity ranged from explosions of lapilli and lava bombs to small lava fountains up to 150 meters high. Thanks to the position of the vents on the slope towards the sea, outside the city perimeter, the first lava flows took that direction, blowing eastward. Moreover, the wind was blowing in the same direction, and even the pyroclastic products, ash and lapilli, fell towards the east, sparing the city. The news of the eruption quickly spread among the inhabitants, who were alerted by neighbors and friends, but also by police and firefighters. Everyone was incredulous, but at the same time they were ready to react, even though there had been no eruption on the island of Heimaey for several thousand years. Icelanders are accustomed to volcanic events. Just a few years earlier, between 1963 and 1967, about 20 kilometers south of Heimaey, following a submarine eruption, the island of Surtsey had formed, clearly visible to the inhabitants of Vestmannaeyjar. Icelandic history is marked by frequent eruptions. On average, every 5 years in that nation, one of its numerous active volcanoes erupts. In 1973, only a few seismic stations were operational in Iceland, and none of them were on Heimaey. The nearest station was located in southern Iceland, about 60 kilometers away. This station recorded, in the 36 hours before the eruption, a swarm of about 200 small earthquakes, which could not be precisely located as the other two necessary stations were missing. Subsequently, some tremors were also felt in Heimaey, but no one imagined that this seismic activity could be a sign of an imminent eruption. Shortly after the eruption began, the inhabitants gathered their essentials and made their way independently, some on foot, some on car, to the harbor, where by fortunate coincidence there was a fleet of about 70 ships. During the storm the day before, many vessels had sought refuge in the town's harbor, protected by towering rocky barriers over 100 meters high to the north and west. Only the hospital patients and those with mobility difficulties had to be transported to the island's airport, dangerously close to the southernmost eruptive vents. In just a few hours, more than 5,000 people left the island, leaving behind only a team of a few dozen volunteers, determined to monitor the eruption's progress and undertake the initial rescue operations for valuable items. The evacuees were welcomed by their fellow countrymen with great solidarity and quickly found accommodation in various settlements, mostly in the south of the country. Aware, however, that they were facing enormous uncertainty, possibly never seeing their homes again. So, Iceland, the land of ice and fire, and the story we wanted to tell you about the forced exodus from the small island of Heimaey describes just one of the many episodes that have long plagued Icelandic communities. But why do the continuous volcanic eruptions that occur on this extremely cold island, located at the edge of the inhabitable world, barely make headlines in the newspapers? And why do its inhabitants continue to live there with absolute nonchalance? Let's try to find out with the help of this splendid video, as usual, from the Insane Curiosity channel, which will guide us through the secrets of the most turbulent, yet simultaneously harmless active volcanoes on our planet. The solar eclipse of April 8th also graced the skies of Iceland, where the moon partially obscured the solar disk for a couple of hours. However, the celestial phenomenon was accompanied by the dramatic event of a new eruption of the Rejkvan volcano, located on the Rejkvan Peninsula southwest of Reykjavik. The new eruption of the Rejkvan volcano began shortly after the end of the eclipse. The incandescent lava illuminated the night sky, creating a spectacle of rare beauty and power. This marks the sixth eruption of the Rejkvan's volcanic system since it awakened last December, after almost 800 years of dormancy. The flowing lava opened enormous cracks in the ground northeast of the town of Grindavik, which was evacuated as a precautionary measure. Another hypothesis of a connection between the eclipse and seismic events? Definitely not. Iceland is an island of volcanic origin characterized by striking landscapes rich in volcanoes, geysers, hot springs, and lava fields. It is an extremely peculiar territory from a geological point of view. In fact, it constitutes the most extensive portion of the emerged mid-ocean ridge. Being essentially a boundary between two lithospheric plates, the Eurasian and the North American, the island is particularly active with volcanoes, geysers, and earthquakes. It is precisely this activity that has been manifesting itself in recent weeks on the Rejkvan Peninsula. Hey guys, hang on a sec before we continue. Be sure to join the Insane Curiosity channel. Click on the bell, you will help us to make products of even higher quality. The uniqueness of the Icelandic landscape is the result of a unique geological history. Iceland, in essence, constitutes a part of the ocean floor that emerged 20 million years ago due to the accumulation of magma from the Earth's mantle. By observing what happens on its surface, we can better understand the phenomena that occur in depth, and the so-called Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which extends across the Atlantic seabed for about 16,000 kilometers in a north-south direction. In essence, a submerged arcing of the ocean floor averaging 2,500 meters high, resembling a gigantic scar. Along the ridge, the North American and Eurasian plates move away from each other at a rate of about 2 centimeters per year. On top of this relief, along its entire length, there extends a depression, the Rift Valley, along which fissures open from which magma from the Earth's mantle emerges. The magma flows on the ocean floor, where it solidifies. When the amount of magma emitted is particularly high, over time its accumulation along the ridge can cause it to emerge from the sea. This is how 20 million years ago Iceland was formed, making it an emerged part of the Mid-Atlantic Range, and thus of the ocean floor. And its landscape is the result of continuous overlaps of lava flows that originated the plateaus in the central area of the island, situated at about 400 to 500 meters above sea level. Here there are also mountains and glaciers, in particular the vast ice cap of Vestmannaeyjar, and many rivers originate from the glaciers, flowing through the plains and towards the coasts, rich in coves and fjords. However, there's a catch. The mutual movement of the North American and Eurasian plates alone wouldn't have been sufficient to allow the accumulation of such an enormous amount of magma to form such a large island. Another factor has contributed: the presence beneath Iceland of a hotspot, namely a restricted and relatively fixed area from which columns of magma continuously rise from the mantle. This hotspot associated with the ridge enhances its activity, i.e. the magma emission. Just as on the ocean floor along the fractures of the ridge, magma also emerges from narrow and long fissures, some tens of kilometers long, forming what are called volcanic systems. Here we need to explain. Iceland hosts 130 volcanic systems, of which at least 30 are decidedly active. But for the vast majority, these are not the typical volcanic cones like Mount Fuji in Japan and Mount St. Helens in the US. They are FIssure volcanoes, very different from what we are used to seeing, as they do not have a central crater. These volcanoes emit a very large quantity of very fluid lava of basaltic composition. The lava spreads out on the sides of the fracture, forming extensive flat plateaus called basalt plateau. The eruptions, preceded by a large number of earthquakes, are often effusive and therefore relatively quiet, but they can also involve particularly violent explosive eruptions, with the emission of huge quantities of gas and ash, also a result of the interaction between magma and ice present on some of these volcanoes. Nevertheless, Icelanders have a fairly relaxed attitude towards eruptions. Volcanic eruptions and seismic activity are usually considered highly spectacular events, worthy of media attention, but nothing to seriously worry about. This means Sunday outings with the family and excursions to observe the ongoing eruption, and for the particularly fortunate, witnessing the flow of lava. However, the frequent earthquakes that precede volcanic eruptions are obviously quite unpleasant. Icelandic building codes are extremely stringent regarding seismic provisions, so buildings are generally considered very safe. Despite the severe damage suffered by the village of Grindavik during the seismic swarm of November 2023, accompanied by the formation of deep cracks and cavities in the straits, the buildings held up very well. However, Icelandic volcanoes don't always behave like harmless tourist attractions, and sometimes they unleash fearful natural forces. It's needless to say that although incredibly in recent decades, eruptions have never caused human casualties, some of the island's major volcanoes still pose a continuous threat to its inhabitants. Let's review some of the most active ones, such as Katla. Located in the south of the country beneath the Eyjafjallajökull Glacier, its last eruption occurred in 1918. Its caldera has a diameter of about 10 kilometers and erupts with a frequency ranging from 13 to 80 years. Hence, any new activity is quite overdue, and the crater is constantly monitored. Since the year 920, there have been 17 documented eruptions. Katla is part of a larger volcanic system, one of the most complex and powerful in the world, centered on the Rejkvan volcano and also including the Heimaey volcano, responsible for a destructive eruption in 1783, and the ASkJa volcanic fissure, the protagonist of the largest eruption in the last 10,000 years. Katla is considered one of the most dangerous volcanic systems in Iceland. It's likely that since the last eruption in 1918, there have been minor eruptions that failed to break through the thick layer of ice covering it, but the awakening of Katla would not be a surprise to anyone in those parts. The main concern is the area south of Katla, which can be hit by powerful floods when lava comes into contact with water generated by the melting ice cap. For this reason, the residents of villages and farms in the area are well prepared with evacuation plans, and Katla is monitored by a vast cellular network tasked with reaching everyone in the area in case of an eruption. In the southwest of the island lies the Katla Volcano. Its name means hooded. Not surprisingly, the summit is always covered by a romantic and evocative blanket of clouds. It stands at 1,491 meters and is the most famous volcano in all of Iceland for its continuous eruptions, so much so that in the Middle Ages it was believed to be the gate of hell. The first eruption was recorded in 1104. Since then, about 20 eruptions have been documented. The most recent ones date back to 1980, 1991, and 2000. In this regard, it seems that the famous Katla volcano is showing further signs indicating a possible and imminent eruption within a short period of time. At the beginning of April last year, a significant accumulation of magma was detected in the northern part of the volcano. Already by mid-March, an almost continuous seismic swarm had caused a state of alert regarding a possible strong eruption, but it turned out to be a false alarm. Apart from its eruptive potential, its fame is predominantly linked to the little warning it gives before erupting. The mountain is mostly aseismic, which means it does not provide warning signals for an upcoming eruption. Climbing Hekla is not recommended for obvious reasons. However, Iceland's most dreaded fiery mouth must undoubtedly be that of the very difficult to pronounce Eyjafjallajökull Volcano. Remember it? In 2010, its eruption disrupted air travel in Europe for several days, causing chaos in all airports and resulting in billions of euros in losses. The enormous ash cloud produced by the volcano had indeed drifted towards the continent, posing a threat to air traffic due to the damage the dust particles would cause to the engines once sucked into the turbines. Fortunately, the emergency subsided about after a week, but soon attention shifted to the agricultural companies near the volcano that had been completely covered by ash. Volunteers from all over the island arrived to help clean animals, fields, and farms. Unfortunately, over time, the situation spelled the end for some farmers who were forced to abandon their land forever. The definition of a remote location, however, is more suited to ASkJa. This dangerous volcano is located north of the Vestmannaeyjar Glacier in an area completely inaccessible for most of the year and surrounded by the highland desert. ASkJa's last eruption occurred in 1961, but the one in 1875 devastated a substantial part of the eastern fjords, in addition to being accompanied by a heavy ash fall that killed animals and ruined crops. Currently, ASkJa is experiencing some activity that could indicate magma accumulation beneath the volcanic system. During the winter of 2022-2023, the melting of the ice covering ASkJa Lake was observed, a phenomena considered very unusual during the winter months and an indicator of increased geothermal activity. Coupled with the increase in seismic activity, all signs point to an eruption on the horizon. ASkJa is now under further observation and access to the area has been restricted. Meanwhile, as you sit back and watch the video, the series of tremors and eruptions from the Rejkvan volcano continues, and the land of the eponymous peninsula is traversed by numerous tongues of incandescent lava pouring out of a 3-kilometer-long fissure. The nighttime landscape is illuminated by orange glows, in a play of lights that captivates the eyes and reminds us once again of how small humans are in the face of what nature still and always reminds us it's capable of. An extraordinary people, the Icelandic. Wouldn't you agree?